Something's not right. Hamilton can't be this slow. Can he? 3 races, 0 podiums, and now he's finally said it. There's a real problem inside Ferrari. But what's starting to leak out might be far worse than anyone expected. Secrets, tension, unequal cars, and a theory that could change everything. Stick around, because what you're about to hear, no one else is telling you. Subscribe only if you want Hamilton to win his 8th World Championship and be crowned as the greatest driver in history. From the moment Lewis Hamilton stepped out under the scarlet spotlight of Maranello wearing the fire-red overalls of Ferrari, the motorsport world froze in collective disbelief. This wasn't a transfer. This wasn't a mere contract update on the F1 grid. This was a shift in the gravitational core of Formula One. This was destiny rewriting itself in real time. The most successful driver in the modern era, the embodiment of resilience, of precision, of cool under pressure, joining forces with the most legendary team in racing history. Ferrari. The name that transcends racing and whispers to the very soul of automotive glory. It was poetic. It was cinematic. It was the final chapter that promised to transform a champion into an immortal. But stories, especially the greatest ones, don't always unfold as expected. Some don't follow scripts. Some mutate into something far darker, far stranger, far more real. And what has happened since Lewis Hamilton signed the deal is not the fairy tale fans dreamed of. It's not the comeback story we were ready to cheer. No. What we are witnessing now is something more akin to a psychological thriller unfolding race by race, frame by frame, beneath the polished veneer of Formula One's most secretive walls. Something's wrong. Visibly, palpably wrong. Not just in terms of results or performance, but in the energy, in the body language, in the coded messages buried in post-race interviews. The shimmer is gone. The magic has dulled. And now Hamilton, cool, composed, unshakable Hamilton, has chosen to speak. Not loudly, not recklessly, but with surgical precision, with intent, and with just enough revelation to send a chill through the paddock and ignite a firestorm in the media. It started with a whisper, a sentence, a single, almost forgettable moment after the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka. The words were vague, deliberately so. But for those who have followed this sport, who have listened to Lewis not just when he's winning but especially when he's wounded, the message was deafening. There's something in the car. Something not quite right. Something that doesn't show up on the screens in real time, but lives in the seat of his pants, in his hands on the wheel, in his gut. A gut that has delivered 7 world titles and survived 18 seasons at the razor's edge of performance. Initially, he did what champions do, he blamed himself. He questioned everything. Was it just a matter of adapting? Was the Ferrari too different from the Mercedes DNA he had become one with over the past decade? Was it psychological? A confidence issue? Doubt. It crept in. And he wrestled with it like a warrior fighting his own shadow. But data doesn't lie. And when the doubts were replaced by data, cold, brutal, relentless data, the picture became clearer. Something wasn't working. And it wasn't him. At first, the anomaly appeared too small to matter. Minor inconsistencies in the telemetry. Slight differences in throttle response. Brake instability in low-speed corners. But when you're Lewis Hamilton, those tiny fragments are the difference between pole position and P8. Between victory and limping home in the midfield. And soon, a pattern emerged. A maddening, elusive, shape-shifting ghost that haunted every lap. One race it was understeer. The next, unpredictable rear grip. At first glance, it looked like the usual struggles of adaptation. But the longer it went on, the more disturbing it became. This wasn't a learning curve. This was sabotage from within, not by people, but by the machinery itself. An internal flaw buried so deep in the SF-25's architecture that it escaped initial scrutiny. Suzuka was supposed to be the turning point. A circuit carved into Hamilton's memory, a place where he had performed symphonies of speed in the past. But this time, it was different. He qualified 8th. Not because he made a mistake, but because the car refused to respond. And in the race, he fought. Every lap was a war. Every corner a negotiation with a car that didn't trust him, and that he couldn't trust. He finished 7th. One clean overtake. No pace. No flow. No fire. After the race, The atmosphere in the Ferrari garage turned glacial. Not tense. Not angry. Cold. Detached. Quiet. Hamilton didn't speak much. But his presence said everything. He sat for hours, eyes glued to telemetry, watching replays over and over, as if searching for the ghost in the machine. Engineers stood around him, unsure of what to say. Because what can you say to the greatest driver of the modern era when you've handed him a weapon that won't fire? Behind the scenes, things began to fracture. Ferrari's famously political environment, always a pressure cooker, began to bubble over. Disagreements flared between departments. Aero blamed chassis. Chassis blamed electronics. And in the middle of it all, Hamilton stood like a storm waiting to break. Calm, yes. But only on the surface. Because beneath that calm is a fire, one that has carried him through racism, heartbreak, defeats, and doubts. One that doesn't tolerate betrayal, mechanical or otherwise. There are whispers now. Dark ones. That maybe the car was never designed with Lewis in mind. That its DNA still echoes the style of Charles Leclerc or even the legacy of Vettel before him. That Hamilton's smooth inputs, his balance-oriented driving, his ability to extract performance through feel, are being strangled by a machine built for aggression and unpredictability. That the team, consciously or not, never fully opened their doors to him. That he's not just battling understeer or brake bias, but a culture clash. An incompatibility written into the very soul of the car. The speculation grows louder with every race. Is Ferrari fractured behind the scenes? Are there factions? Is there resistance to Hamilton's influence? Was he truly brought in to win, or to serve as a distraction from deeper structural problems within the Scuderia? And how much longer can he tolerate this? Lewis Hamilton has always played the long game. He knows politics. He understands power dynamics. But he also knows when it's time to make a statement. And he just did. Not by storming out. Not by pointing fingers. But by lighting a match and letting the world smell the smoke. His recent comments weren't frustration. They were warnings. Controlled, intentional, and terrifyingly honest. He's not just reporting a problem. He's calling out a mystery. And in Formula One, a mystery with no answer is a crisis waiting to explode. Because when a driver of Hamilton's caliber says the car has a hidden flaw, when he says something fundamental is broken, you listen. You listen because his career has been built not just on speed, but on truth. He doesn't bluff. He doesn't cry wolf. If he says there's a ghost in the machine, you better start looking under the floorboards. And now we wait. Wait to see what Ferrari does. Wait to see if this team, drowning in expectations and mythology, can adapt. Because this is no longer about this season. It's about legacy. About whether the most decorated driver of this generation will be given the tools to write his final masterpiece, or whether this chapter ends in silence, frustration, and the cruelest of what-ifs. Sources deeply embedded within the Scuderia Ferrari camp, individuals who have been close enough to the core to hear the tone of engineers when they think no one is listening, who have walked the garages in the quiet hours after the race day madness fades, have started to leak whispers. These whispers carry weight, not because they're dramatic, but because of how meticulously they mirror the pattern of events unfolding on track. It all starts with Lewis Hamilton's cryptic comments, delivered with the cool, seasoned tone of a man who has been at the top long enough to know exactly how to say something without actually saying it. A man who knows the politics of Formula One like the back of his hand. A man who chooses every word the way he chooses every apex, deliberately. What Hamilton alluded to post-race in Japan wasn't frustration. It wasn't the usual venting we sometimes hear when a driver feels wronged by strategy, tires, or track conditions. No, it was something different, calculated, restrained, but heavy with implication. His words weren't aimed at the track. They were aimed at the garage. And those close to the situation now believe what he's referencing may be much more complex than anyone outside the paddock has fully realized. It's not about a broken part. It's not a rogue damper or a glitch in the setup sheet. This isn't about understeer into turn one or too much rotation mid-corner. What insiders are suggesting now is that Hamilton's issue isn't mechanical in the way fans are used to hearing. It's not visible. It's not obvious. It's systemic. The whispers suggest the root of the issue may be a hidden aerodynamic anomaly. Something that doesn't show up in the simulator. Something that doesn't flag a red light on the telemetry unless you know exactly what you're looking for. It's buried in the airflow dynamics, specifically over the rear diffuser, which plays a crucial role in generating downforce at speed. The theory goes that there's a strange behavior in how the air moves under Hamilton's car in high-speed corners, a behavior that destabilizes the rear under very specific conditions. It could be due to how the airflow separates. It could be vortex shedding at certain yaw angles. It might even be something caused by minor asymmetries in the floor edge, details so small they wouldn't even register on standard inspection equipment. And the kicker? It doesn't happen consistently. It's not always there in FP1 or FP2. It doesn't always show up in qualifying simulations. It manifests in high-deg scenarios, on tracks with abrasive tarmac, during sudden weight shifts, when the car is under the most stress, and the driver is asking for every last gram of grip. It's the kind of thing that can only be identified by a driver who knows the car better than most engineers do. Someone with Hamilton's racecraft, his sensitivity, his history of dissecting machinery corner by corner. But the aerodynamic ghost isn't the only suspect. There's also growing concern about the MGUK, the kinetic energy recovery system that converts braking energy into electric power and redistributes it to the drivetrain. Some believe Hamilton's unit may be harvesting unevenly under braking. Not enough to fail. Not enough to trigger alarms. But just enough to introduce inconsistent deceleration, especially mid-corner when downshifting into tight turns. That could easily destabilize the car. It would also explain the awkward over-rotation he's mentioned during high-load entries. The inconsistent energy harvesting could change how the car behaves depending on temperature, tire wear, or even minor changes in brake bias. And when it happens unexpectedly, it's not just annoying, it's terrifying. It ruins confidence. And confidence is everything in Formula One. Now, here's where things get even murkier. Some members of the paddock, especially those with long memories and deep suspicions, have started to wonder whether the problem isn't with the car, but with Hamilton's car specifically. There is increasing talk, still speculative, still whispered, that his car might not be identical to Charles Leclerc's. Not on paper. Not in any way that violates FIA regulations. But perhaps in the way that counts most: the feel, the handling, the consistency, the psychology. What if Ferrari is quietly A/B testing? What if Hamilton's side of the garage is being used to gather data for experimental components that haven't yet been approved for race-wide deployment? What if he's unknowingly driving the prototype while Leclerc races the production model? Sources close to the team have hinted that Ferrari has been aggressively pursuing mid-season upgrades, particularly in light of Red Bull's continued dominance and McLaren's resurgence. And what better way to test a radical new part than under race conditions? On a car driven by one of the greatest in history, someone who can extract performance and identify anomalies with surgical precision. If this is true, and Hamilton wasn't made fully aware, if he's been assigned an experimental spec while Leclerc retains the stable package, the implications are explosive. It would call into question the integrity of internal team dynamics. It would ignite debates about transparency. It would fuel a media storm around favoritism, betrayal, and the unwritten rule that both cars should be equal, especially when the drivers are both elite-tier competitors. Hamilton has been here before. He's seen the movie. He knows the signs. He can read the telemetry, but more importantly, he can feel the difference. That's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't need to guess. He's already watching Leclerc's onboards. He's studying sector times. He sees the way Leclerc can carry more speed through Sector 3. He knows that exit velocity out of the last chicane isn't a driving difference, it's a grip difference, a balance difference, a car difference. And so when he says, "We're working to understand where that comes from. I've been underperforming. Now I know why," it's not just a comment. It's a chess move. It's a statement of awareness. It's Hamilton planting a flag in the ground and letting the world know he suspects something. He may not be ready to say it outright. Not yet. But the seed has been planted. The tone has shifted. And every word he speaks from now on will be scrutinized through the lens of suspicion and subtle accusation. Because when a 7-time world champion starts hinting that things aren't equal behind the curtain, when he starts choosing his words like a man preparing a case, it doesn't matter what the telemetry says. The story has already begun. The drama is no longer confined to the racetrack. It's alive in the paddock, in the media pen, in the backrooms where engineers make choices that ripple through careers. And for Hamilton, it might just be the beginning of his most political battle yet. Those who have recently stepped into the high-security, invitation-only inner workings of Scuderia Ferrari are whispering a truth that's becoming harder to ignore as the season unfolds. The real drama isn't what the cameras catch during qualifying laps, press conferences, or podium ceremonies. It's what's unfolding behind closed doors in hushed tones, and over increasingly tense meetings deep within Maranello. An unfolding power struggle, a creeping sense of dysfunction, and a growing disconnect that could turn what was meant to be a fairy tale into a full-blown crisis. For fans, Lewis Hamilton's arrival at Ferrari was the kind of seismic move that rewrites history books. The seven-time world champion, the man who had turned silver into gold at Mercedes for over a decade, was making what many called a romantic move to the prancing horse. It was about legacy, about chasing the impossible, about building something beautiful. But beneath the carefully curated PR statements and picture-perfect announcements, something far more complicated, and far more human, is unraveling. Whispers have turned into warnings. Those embedded within Ferrari's engineering structure now describe an increasingly volatile relationship between Hamilton's longtime performance engineer, who was handpicked to join him from Mercedes, and Ferrari's top technical decision-makers. What was supposed to be a merging of elite minds is fast becoming a battle of ideologies, egos, and old guard versus new. Meetings that once served as strategic symphonies are now verbal minefields. Collaborative energy has been replaced by cautious maneuvering. Words are weighed. Every suggestion feels like a gamble. The team is operating in a climate of second-guessing, where even a straightforward tire strategy discussion spirals into prolonged looping arguments. One senior insider compared the current mood to trying to tune a piano while someone is hammering the keys. It's not just disagreement, it's disarray. The trust that glues a Formula One team together is slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to erode. And the consequences are becoming visible not just internally, but in the raw performance data, in qualifying positions, and in the growing tension radiating from Hamilton himself. Lewis Hamilton is not known for cracking under pressure. On the contrary, he has spent over a decade turning adversity into momentum, pressure into power, setbacks into comebacks. But even Hamilton, revered for his emotional control and mental resilience, has started to show signs that the Ferrari transition is not unfolding as planned. At Suzuka, there was a flash, a moment that slipped past the media filters. After a frustrating qualifying session, Hamilton was seen slamming his steering wheel with force, a rare, almost jarring departure from his normally composed persona. Those who've worked with him closely say it wasn't just frustration at missing out on a few grid positions. It was something deeper. Something festering. The real story, however, emerged not in front of cameras, but behind closed doors. The post-race debrief wasn't business as usual. It stretched longer than expected, not because the car was complex, but because the answers were unsatisfying. Hamilton reportedly asked direct, probing questions about strategy, setup, and decision-making processes. He wanted specifics. He got generalities. The tone of the room shifted. One witness called it controlled fury. Another simply said, you could feel the air change when he started talking. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. And disappointment from Lewis hits differently. It means the faith is breaking. And it's not just a philosophical rift. It's operational, tactical, tangible. During the race, millions of fans heard what might go down as one of the season's defining exchanges. Hamilton, needing clarity mid-race, requested detailed sector data to understand where he was losing time, standard procedure for a driver of his caliber. What he got in return was vague. Turns 8 and 9, maybe a 10th, his engineer responded. There was hesitation. Uncertainty. No concrete numbers. And then, the voice that came back was sharper than we've heard in years. Maybe? I need numbers, man. It was more than just a frustrated retort. It was disbelief. It was Lewis Hamilton, the man who has built a career on surgical precision, realizing in real time that the data feedback loop, the lifeblood of modern F1 decision-making, was broken or, at the very least, flawed. He doesn't do maybe. He does milliseconds. He doesn't tolerate approximation. He demands perfection. And in that moment, live on radio, in front of the world, we saw the curtain drop. We saw a champion suddenly unsure if the team around him could deliver at the level he's accustomed to. This isn't just about race pace or qualifying gaps. It's about identity. Hamilton came to Ferrari with dreams of building a legacy, of transcending sport by bringing glory back to its most storied team. He didn't come to survive, he came to conquer. But how do you conquer when the war isn't on the track, but inside your own garage? Fans are starting to ask the hard questions. Is Ferrari's culture too rigid, too insular, to adapt to Hamilton's way of working? Is there resistance to change buried so deep in the organization that even the most successful driver in history can't uproot it? And what happens if this continues? What happens when the small cracks, an unclear radio message here, a reverse strategic call there, turn into full-blown fault lines? The truth is, Hamilton's patience isn't infinite. And though he may wear a calm exterior, those close to him know, once trust begins to fray, it's almost impossible to repair. At Mercedes, he was surrounded by people who anticipated his needs before he even voiced them. At Ferrari, he's still being treated like a guest in a house that isn't quite sure what to do with him. And if the house doesn't adapt, he may start looking for the exit, literally or metaphorically. For now, he's still fighting. Still showing up. Still delivering performances that only a driver of his caliber can summon. But the clock is ticking. And the more Ferrari stalls, the more the narrative slips out of their hands. What was once a dream scenario, the greatest driver of a generation in the most legendary car, now teeters dangerously close to becoming a cautionary tale. This isn't just a test of machinery. It's a test of will, of culture, of belief. And if Ferrari can't find a way to close the growing chasm between Hamilton's vision and their internal reality, they may soon learn the most painful lesson of all. You can sign a champion, but if you don't trust him, if you don't listen to him, you never really have him at all. Leclerc isn't immune either. It all started with a voice over the radio, standard procedure, the kind of message that gets exchanged hundreds of times over the course of a Grand Prix weekend. Adjust your driving style to preserve the tires, the engineer said. Calm. Tactical. But the reply that came back was anything but calm. I'm not doing it for a reason. 6 words. 6 sharp, surgical words. But they sliced through the calm like a scalpel. It was cold. It was pointed. And more importantly, it was out of character. Charles Leclerc, typically the diplomat behind the wheel, had just fired a warning shot. This wasn't just a driver pushing back on tire management strategy. This was a message. A coded, unmistakable message sent from cockpit to pit wall, buried inside a seemingly simple sentence. You're not listening to me. I'm driving around a problem you refuse to see. And just like that, the cracks started to show. Ferrari's internal structure, often praised for its professionalism, its precision, its mythos, suddenly felt less like a fortress and more like a glass house. The illusion of control had shattered. Communication breakdowns, setup confusion, and missed windows of opportunity began to swirl like smoke from a fire no one wanted to admit was burning. And then came the explosion. The disqualification in China. It wasn't just embarrassing. It was damning. The SF-25, Ferrari's pride and joy, their ticket back to glory, had been found in violation of a very basic regulation: excessive plank wear. The kind of infraction that doesn't just cost points. It costs trust. It shakes the team to its core. Because if you can't get the floor right, what else have you gotten wrong? The response from Ferrari was immediate and defensive. Raise the ride height. Minimize the risk of another penalty. Save face. But in solving one problem, they unleashed another, one far more insidious. They broke the car's balance. By altering the ride height, they compromised the aerodynamics, the flow, the stability, the very soul of what makes a Formula One car competitive. And Lewis Hamilton knew it immediately. We're running higher than we want, he said post-race, the frustration seeping into every syllable. It's compromising everything: downforce, balance, confidence. That last word echoed. Confidence. When a driver of Hamilton's caliber, 7-time world champion, master of adaptability, a man who made an art of extracting performance from flawed machinery, says he no longer feels confident, that's not a complaint. That's a warning. That's a siren blaring through the paddock. Something is fundamentally wrong. Privately, engineers began to admit the truth. The SF-25 had become unpredictable under braking. The kind of unpredictability that drivers fear more than wet weather or engine failures. Because in Formula One, confidence in braking is everything. It determines your rhythm, your overtaking chances, your tire wear, your battle instincts. If you can't trust the car under deceleration, you're no longer a driver, you're a hostage. And then came Suzuka. The onboard footage told a story Ferrari couldn't spin. The telemetry might live in the garage, but the truth was out there, in plain view, for every fan, pundit, and rival engineer to see. The car wasn't just difficult. It was schizophrenic. At low speeds, it danced with oversteer, twitching like it was built on marbles. At high speeds, it washed out with understeer, refusing to rotate, lagging behind Hamilton's inputs like a stubborn mule. On throttle exit, the rear became a live wire, unstable, untamed, dangerous. Watching Hamilton fight it through 130 was like watching a gladiator battle a lion with a broken sword. Every corner was a negotiation. Every apex was a gamble. You could see it in his hands, in the corrections, in the micro-movements no casual fan would ever notice, but every true follower of the sport would recognize as desperation. And that desperation wasn't from lack of skill. It was from lack of faith in the machinery beneath him. And then came the whisper. At first, it sounded like gossip. Paddock chatter. Background noise. But then, more and more voices echoed it, like an underground current surging toward the surface. Ferrari, according to multiple sources, was considering a chassis switch. For Hamilton. Quietly. No press release. No fanfare. Just a silent swap. A routine evaluation, they might call it. A procedural decision. Nothing to see here. But behind that smokescreen was a bombshell. Because if Ferrari really does change Hamilton's chassis, and if the new chassis immediately shows better performance, then the implications are nuclear. It confirms what Hamilton has likely feared since pre-season testing, that his original car was flawed, that he wasn't imagining it, that the imbalance wasn't setup, that the erratic handling wasn't adaptation, that the underperformance wasn't driver error. It was the car. And that truth could tear through Maranello like a wildfire. Because if it's true, the questions begin flooding in, unforgiving, relentless. Why wasn't it discovered earlier? How many points have they lost? Why was Leclerc not affected in the same way? Did Hamilton receive a second-rate chassis from day one? Is there bias? Is there favoritism? Or worse, was it incompetence? And what if they don't make the switch? What if they ride this out? What if the whispers are just that, whispers, and Ferrari decides to tough it out with the same chassis, the same setup, the same excuses? Then the problem only grows. Because time doesn't wait. Bahrain is gone. Imola looms. Monaco is on the horizon. These aren't just races. They are stages, moments, opportunities. And each one that passes without progress chips away at something fragile. Faith, belief, hope. The sponsors start making calls. The media begins its hunt. The narrative forms in the shadows and starts taking shape in headlines. Was this the biggest mistake of Hamilton's career? Because that's what's on the line now. Not just points. Not just podiums. Not just performance. Legacy. Hamilton didn't come to Ferrari to be another chapter. He came to be the ending. The legend. The man who pulled off the impossible again. He came to reignite the fire Schumacher once lit. To elevate Red back to royalty. But instead, he's watching a different movie unfold. He sees McLaren on the rise. Woking's orange machine becoming a missile in the hands of Norris. He watches Red Bull remain untouchable, Verstappen grinning as the rest chase shadows. He watches Mercedes recover, slowly but surely, finding direction, finding fight. And him? He's left in the limbo. Between what was promised and what's real. Between potential and purgatory. Between hope and hell. So now he waits. Not with patience, but with grit. With fury. With the kind of resolve that made him great in the first place. He's waiting for Ferrari to give him a car worthy of his ambition, his name, his legacy. But if they don't, if they can't, if this spiral continues, then this may be the most tragic twist in the history of Formula One. Not because Hamilton failed, but because he was never truly given a chance to succeed. And that would be the real heartbreak.